He took the house, the savings, and even the dog, believing he had left her with nothing. But in the fine print of the divorce decree, under a list of derelict liabilities, was one asset he never bothered to look at, an old, forgotten foundry in a town she'd never heard of. What she found there wasn't just about rebuilding her life. It was about uncovering the last secret her father ever kept. If you've ever had to start over from scratch, I mean really from zero, then you know the kind of quiet I'm talking about. Hit that subscribe button if you're part of the community of people who've had to find strength they didn't know they had, because this story is for you. The silence in the apartment was the first thing that truly felt like mine. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a hollow, ringing void where a life used to be. For the past 6 months, the sounds had been of lawyers on the phone, of Mark's condescending explanations, of tape pulling off a roll as I packed his things. Then my things, then the things that were supposed to be our things. Now, there was nothing left to pack. Just me, a single cardboard box of personal effects, and the echo of a judge's gavel that had split my world in two. The final decree had arrived by courier that morning, a thick, sterile envelope that felt heavier than a tombstone. I hadn't opened it. I just set it on the scarred countertop of the kitchen. I had to be out of by 5 o'clock. It was already 3. The sunlight, thin and watery for a late autumn afternoon, sliced through the dusty blinds, illuminating floating particles of dust, the ghosts of 1,000 shared meals and arguments. I ran my hand along the counter, a faint film of grime sticking to my fingertips. Mark had always been meticulous about cleaning. I, apparently, was not. It was one of the 100 small failures he'd cataloged for his lawyer, painting a picture of a woman who was careless, emotionally unstable, and incapable of managing a household, let alone a life. And in the sterile, fluorescent-lit conference rooms, surrounded by men in expensive suits, I'd started to believe him. It's amazing how quickly you can forget yourself when someone else is telling you who you are, day in and day out. My box contained so little. A frayed copy of a book my dad gave me before he died, a handful of photos that didn't include Mark, a ceramic mug with a chipped rim that I'd had since college, and my laptop. Everything else had been itemized, appraised, and divided. He got the condo because his name was first on the mortgage. He got the car because he made the payments. He got the savings because it was in an account he'd opened before we were married. He even got Gus, our golden retriever, arguing that I couldn't provide a stable environment. The court agreed. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see Gus's confused face as Mark clipped the leash on his collar and led him away for the last time. That was the moment the numbness finally broke and a deep, guttural sob had torn its way out of my chest. In front of everyone. Another point for his column. Emotionally unstable. I picked up the legal envelope. It was time. I had to face it. I tore the flap, my fingers clumsy and stiff. Inside was a thick stack of papers, dense with legalese that made my head swim. I scanned the asset division summary, my eyes glazing over the familiar list of things I had lost. And then I saw it, at the very bottom, under a section titled Liabilities and Transferred Properties of Nominal Value. It was one line, almost an afterthought. Item 7. Deed to Oakhaven Foundry and Ironworks, Oakhaven, PA. Assessed value, $1. Tax liability, pending. I stared at it, my brow furrowed. Oakhaven. I'd never heard of the place. Foundry? I had no idea what my name was doing attached to a foundry. I vaguely remembered my father mentioning something years ago, some failed business venture from his youth, a mistake he'd buried. He'd died suddenly 5 years ago, a heart attack that felt like the world's cruelest magic trick, and my grief had been a fog that obscured most of my memories of that time. Mark and I had just gotten married, and he'd handled the estate. He had sat me down, patted my hand, and told me, "Don't you worry, Clara. Your dad left a bit of a mess, some debts. I'll take care of it all. It's mostly worthless anyway." I was so grateful, so lost in my own pain, that I just signed whatever he put in front of me. I trusted him. That was my foundational mistake. I looked at the line again. Transferred to me. Why? Why would Mark, who had fought me for a set of dinner plates, let a piece of property, however worthless, slip through his fingers? The answer was right there in the document. Assessed value, $1. He hadn't forgotten it. He had discarded it. He'd probably had his lawyer look into it, see the back taxes, the cost of demolition, and decided it was a burden, a piece of trash he could saddle me with. Another little twist of the knife. Here, you can have the debt. You can have the failure. It suits you. The cruelty of it was so perfectly him. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. It was a dry, rusty sound. So this was it. This was my inheritance. A broken-down building in a town I couldn't place on a map, and a potential bill from the IRS. It was almost poetic. I folded the papers and shoved them into my coat pocket. My phone buzzed. It was the landlord. Ms. Jensen? Just a reminder you need to be out by 5. The new tenants are moving in tomorrow. I looked around the empty apartment, at the pale rectangles on the walls where our pictures used to hang. I'm leaving now, I said, my voice flat. Just dropping off the keys. I picked up my single box, took one last look at the life that was no longer mine, and walked out the door without looking back. The lock clicked shut behind me, a sound of absolute finality. I was 28 years old, and I had absolutely nothing. Or so I thought. I had a $1 Foundry. And in the hollow space where my life used to be, that single, absurd fact felt less like an insult and more like a question mark. It was the only thing in the world that was mine, and I had to know what it was. The next morning, I was sitting in a sterile coffee shop, using their free Wi-Fi to drain the last dregs of my checking account. I paid my final utility bill, leaving me with a grand total of $412.37. It wasn't enough to live on for a month, let alone start a new life. Panic, cold and sharp, was beginning to prickle at the edges of the numbness. I needed a job, a room to rent, a plan. But my mind kept snagging on that one line in the decree. Oakhaven Foundry. I typed the name into a search engine. The results were sparse. Oakhaven, Pennsylvania, was a small town in the western part of the state, deep in what was once coal and steel country. A handful of grainy photos showed a sleepy main street with brick buildings and faded awnings. The Wikipedia page was a single paragraph, mentioning its peak population in the 1950s and a steady decline ever since. It was a ghost to the American dream. Then I searched for the Foundry itself. The only result was a county tax record. It listed the property as abandoned, owned by a holding company my father had dissolved years ago, with the ownership now defaulting to his sole heir, me, Clara Jensen. There was a satellite image, a blurry, pixelated shape of a large, rust-colored roof surrounded by overgrown trees, set back from a narrow country road on the edge of town. It looked less like a building and more like a wound on the landscape. My phone rang, an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Hello. A dry, reedy voice on the other end cleared his throat. Is this Miss Clara Jensen? Formerly Clara Connolly? I flinched at my maiden name. Yes, this is she, Ms. Jensen. My name is Arthur Abernathy. I was your father's attorney and friend, he added, his voice softening slightly. I'm calling because I was notified of the finalization of your divorce. I'm so very sorry for what you've been through. I didn't know what to say. Mr. Abernathy. The name was vaguely familiar, a signature on a few of the estate documents Mark had rushed me through signing. Thank you, I managed. It's been difficult, an understatement of colossal proportions. I'm sure, he said, a genuine sympathy in his tone that felt like a glass of cool water in a desert. Clara, I'm not supposed to do this. Your father's instructions were very specific, but circumstances have changed. I believe your ex-husband's legal team contacted our office about the Oakhaven property last year. My blood ran cold. They did. Oh, yes, Mr. Abernathy said, a hint of dry amusement in his voice. They were quite aggressive. They saw it on the initial asset list and demanded to know its value. I sent them the most recent county assessment, the one that lists it as practically worthless due to remediation costs. They also saw the outstanding tax liens. They dropped their inquiry immediately. In fact, they made a point of ensuring it was transferred solely to you in the settlement. They thought they were being clever. I squeezed my eyes shut. Of course they did. Mark was nothing if not vindictive. So it really is just a liability, I said, the tiny flicker of hope I hadn't even realized was there sputtering out. On paper, Mr. Abernathy said, and the way he said it made me sit up straight. On paper, it is a mess. But your father, Richard, was a complicated man. He bought that place for a song 30 years ago. It was already a ruin then. He never told your mother, never told anyone but me. He just tinkered. He paid the taxes for years, just enough to keep the county from seizing it. He had a purpose for it, a plan. A plan? My father was a CPA. He was a man of spreadsheets and balanced budgets. He wore gray suits and organized his sock drawer by color. The idea of him having a secret, derelict foundry was like imagining a rock growing wings. What plan? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He never told me the specifics, Mr. Abernathy admitted. He just told me that if anything ever happened to him, and if you were ever in real trouble, I was to give you a key and a letter he left with me. He said you would know what to do. My heart was hammering against my ribs. A key, a letter. This was real. He made me promise to wait at least 5 years after his death. Or until you were, and I quote, free of that slick-haired charlatan. A choked laugh bubbled up in my throat. Dad had never liked Mark. He'd been polite, but I'd always seen a coolness in his eyes whenever Mark was around. I just hadn't wanted to see it. Do you still have them? I asked, my voice tight with a mixture of fear and a wild, unfamiliar hope. I do, he said. They're in my office safe. They are yours, Clara, whenever you are ready to claim them. I looked at my laptop screen, at the $400 balance. I looked out the coffee shop window at a world that felt alien and hostile. I had no home, no job, no future. But I had a key, I had a letter, and I had a $1 Foundry. Mr. Abernathy, I said, my voice clearer and stronger than it had been in months. Where is your office? The drive to Oakhaven felt like a journey to another planet. I'd used $200 of my dwindling cash to get my beat-up hatchback serviced, the one possession Mark hadn't deemed worthy of taking. The mechanic had sucked his teeth and told me the car needed a new transmission, but for now he'd done what he could. Just don't push her too hard, he'd warned. I spent another $50 on a cheap motel room for the night, and the rest on gas and a bag of groceries that consisted mostly of peanut butter and bread. The highway stretched out before me, a ribbon of gray asphalt cutting through the browning hills of late autumn. For hours, the landscape was a blur of bare trees and empty fields. The farther I drove from the city, the more the tension in my shoulders began to ease. I was leaving the place of my humiliation behind. I was driving toward an unknown, and for the first time in a very long time, that felt more exciting than terrifying. Mr. Abernathy's office was on the second floor of a brick building on Oakhaven's Main Street. The paint on the door was peeling, the gold leaf letters of his name faded and cracked. The man himself was just as I'd pictured, tall, stooped, with kind eyes behind thick glasses and a suit that was at least 20 years out of style. He greeted me with a warm, dry hand and led me into an office that smelled of old paper, leather, and pipe tobacco. He didn't press me for details about the divorce. He simply sat me down in a worn armchair, went to an old, hulking safe in the corner, and returned with 2 items. The first was a long, heavy iron key pitted with rust. It looked like something from a medieval castle. The second was a thick, yellowed envelope sealed with wax. My name was written on the front in my father's familiar, precise script. Seeing his handwriting was like a punch to the gut. Tears sprang to my eyes, hot and sudden. He loved you very much, Clara, Mr. Abernathy said softly. He was so proud of you. He just worried. He saw what your ex-husband was long before you did. He didn't want to interfere, but he wanted to leave you a lifeline. I clutched the envelope to my chest. A lifeline. Thank you, I whispered, the words thick in my throat. He nodded and handed me a piece of paper with a hand-drawn map. It's about 2 miles out of town. The road isn't marked, but you'll see the old gate. The lock is rusted shut, but the chain is weak. You should be able to break it. Be careful, Clara. The place hasn't been touched in years. I followed the map, turning off the main road onto a cracked, potholed lane overgrown with weeds. After a few minutes, I saw it. A massive, wrought iron gate, flanked by crumbling stone pillars. A faded, barely legible sign hung crookedly from one bar. Oakhaven Foundry and Ironworks. The gate was held shut by a thick, rusty chain, and a padlock that looked like it had been fused together by time and weather. As Mr. Abernathy predicted, a few hard yanks on the chain caused one of the links to groan and then snap. The gates swung inward with a shriek of protesting metal. I drove through, my car's tires crunching on gravel and fallen leaves. The driveway was a tunnel of overarching skeletal trees. And then I saw it. The building was a monster. A vast, sprawling cathedral of rust-red brick and corrugated steel, its many roofs sagging in places, its windows like vacant eyes, most of them shattered. A towering brick smokestack stood sentinel against the gray sky, a silent monument to a dead industry. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming. It wasn't just a building, it was a complex. There was the main foundry, a long, high-ceilinged structure, and several smaller outbuildings, all in various states of decay. Weeds grew through cracks in the concrete foundation. A patina of rust and grime covered everything. It looked like the set of a post-apocalyptic movie. My heart sank. This wasn't a lifeline. This was a tomb. Mark was right. It was worthless. A wave of despair washed over me, so strong it made my knees feel weak. I had come all this way for nothing. A pile of bricks and a mountain of debt. I sat in my car for a long time, just staring at it, the heavy iron key feeling cold and useless in my hand. The silence here was different from the silence in the apartment. It was older, deeper. It was the silence of abandonment. I could almost hear the ghosts of the men who had worked here, the roar of the furnaces, the clang of hammers on steel. Now, there was only the sighing of the wind through the broken panes of glass. I almost turned the car around. I could drive away, leave the key on Mr. Abernathy's doorstep, and just disappear. Start over somewhere new, as someone new. But then I looked at the envelope on the passenger seat. My father's handwriting. He had left this for me. For a reason. Whatever was inside that building, whatever his plan was, I owed it to him to at least see it through. I couldn't let Mark's cynical assessment be the final word. I had to know. Taking a deep breath, I got out of the car. The air was cold and smelled of damp earth and rust. I walked toward the largest of the buildings, to a set of massive double doors made of thick, weathered wood reinforced with iron straps. In the center was a smaller door, and below its handle, a keyhole that looked impossibly large. I slid the iron key into the lock. It grated, resisted, and for a moment I thought it was hopeless. I put my shoulder into it, turning with all my weight. There was a loud, painful-sounding crack as decades of rust and corrosion gave way. The lock turned. I pulled the handle, and the small door groaned open into darkness. The air that rolled out was thick and stale, a cocktail of dust, cold metal, and something else, a faint, lingering scent of coal smoke and oil, trapped for years. I hesitated on the threshold, my heart pounding. Stepping inside felt like stepping into the past, into a place that time had forgotten. I fumbled for my phone, turning on its flashlight. The beam cut a weak path through the gloom, illuminating a vast, cavernous space. The ceiling soared 3 stories above me, crisscrossed with steel beams and catwalks, all of it shrouded in cobwebs as thick as cotton candy. The floor was concrete, littered with debris. And everywhere there was machinery. Huge, silent, iron beasts sleeping under blankets of dust. Forges, presses, lathes, grinders. They were dinosaurs, relics from another age. Light filtered in through the high, grimy windows, creating ethereal shafts of dusty gold in the darkness. It was terrifying and, in a strange way, beautiful. I walked deeper into the main foundry floor, my footsteps echoing in the immense space. I ran my hand over a giant anvil, the cold steel smooth and solid under my palm. I could imagine the rhythmic clang of a hammer, the shower of sparks, the sweat and muscle it took to shape metal here. My father was an accountant. What in the world was he doing with a place like this? It made no sense. I explored for what felt like hours, moving from the main floor to the smaller workshops and storage rooms that lined the perimeter. Most were empty, save for piles of rotting pallets and rusted scrap. But in the far back corner of the complex, I found a door that was different. It was newer, made of solid steel, with a modern deadbolt. It was completely out of place among the decay. The key Mr. Abernathy gave me didn't fit. I tried the handle, and to my shock, it was unlocked. The room inside was an office. Unlike the rest of the Foundry, it was relatively clean. There was a simple wooden desk, a chair, and a large drafting table. A thick layer of dust covered everything, but it was clear this space had been cared for at some point. On the wall was a large corkboard, covered in sketches and blueprints. They weren't for industrial parts. They were drawings of intricate metal sculptures, elegant furniture, and delicate, artistic gates. They were beautiful. My father, the man of numbers, had the soul of an artist. I moved to the desk. On it was a single, small, brass key, lying next to a tarnished nameplate that read, Richard Connolly. And underneath the desk, tucked away in the shadows, was a heavy steel footlocker. The small brass key fit its lock perfectly. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling slightly, and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cheesecloth, were stacks of $100 bills, bound with rubber bands. And on top of the money, there was another envelope, identical to the one Mr. Abernathy had given me. This one, however, was already open. It was the letter, the real letter, the one he had left for me here. My legs felt weak. I sank into the dusty office chair, my eyes fixed on the contents of the footlocker. I didn't count the money, but there were dozens of stacks. It had to be tens of thousands, maybe more. A fortune to someone like me. But it was the letter that held my attention. The other envelope, the one I still clutched in my hand, must be a decoy, a formality. This was the heart of it. This was the secret. With shaking fingers, I pulled out the folded pages and began to read. My dearest Clara, it began in that same precise hand. If you're reading this, it means several things have happened. It means I'm gone. It means that man you married has finally shown his true colors. And it means you have found your way here, to my ridiculous, beautiful secret. I'm so sorry, my girl. I'm sorry for the pain you must be in, and I'm sorry I'm not there to help you through it. I saw him for what he was from the beginning, a man who saw everything, including people, as assets to be acquired and controlled. I tried to warn you in my clumsy way, but you had to see it for yourself. I only hope he did not break your spirit completely. I don't think he could. You have more steel in you than you know. You get that from your mother. About this place, I know what you must be thinking. Your father, the boring accountant, the man who lived his life in shades of gray. But before I was an accountant, before I was a husband or a father, I wanted to be a maker. I wanted to work with my hands. My own father, your grandfather, he was a blacksmith. Not a fancy one, just a man who could fix anything made of metal. He taught me. I loved the heat, the noise, the way you could take something hard and unyielding and shape it into something beautiful and useful. But it wasn't a practical living, he said. He pushed me toward college, toward numbers. Use your head, not your back, he'd say. So I did. And I built a good life, a safe life. I met your mother. We had you, and I never, ever regretted that path. You were the greatest thing I ever made. But there was always a part of me that missed the fire. About 30 years ago, I found this place. It was a wreck, already abandoned for decades. The county was selling it for back taxes, and I bought it for less than the price of a used car. It was my escape. I come out here on weekends, telling your mother I was going fishing. I wasn't lying entirely. I was fishing for a piece of my own soul. I cleaned up this office. I got one of the old generators working. I started small, fixing old tools, making things for the house. And then I started to meet people. Other makers, artists, craftsmen, people with incredible talent, but no space, no money for the heavy equipment they needed. This town, Oak Haven, it's full of people like that. People the world has written off, just like this building. So I started letting them use the space. Quietly. A woodworker who made incredible furniture, but was working out of his garage. A young woman who was a brilliant metal sculptor, but couldn't afford to rent a studio. We became a small, secret community, a guild of ghosts working in a dead foundry. We called it the Oak Haven Project. The money in this box, it isn't mine. Well, some of it is, the seed money, but most of it is theirs. It's a co-op fund. We'd sell our work at craft fairs in other cities under different names and pool the profits. This money was for new equipment, for repairs, for helping someone pay their medical bills. It was a lifeline built on trust and beautiful, handmade things. It was the proudest achievement of my life, aside from you. Now it is yours. The Foundry, the project, the money. It all belongs to you, and you have a choice to make. There's a file on the laptop in the desk drawer. It contains details of a standing offer from a company called Apex Development. They want this land. They've wanted it for years. They want to tear all this down and build a distribution warehouse. The offer is substantial. Enough money for you to go anywhere, start a new life, and never have to worry about money again. You could take it and walk away. No one would blame you. After what you've been through, you deserve an easy path. That is your first option, the easy or wrong. The second option is the harder right. You can keep this place. You can use the money in this box to pay the back taxes, to fix the roof, to bring this Foundry back to life. You can find the other members of the project. Their contact information is in a notebook in the desk. You can continue the work we started. You can give people a place to create, a place to belong. It will be hard. It will be a fight. The developers will not give up easily. But this place, it isn't just a pile of bricks, Clara. It's a testament to the idea that people and places that are deemed worthless can still create things of incredible beauty and value. It is a home for lost things. I suppose, in a way, I built it for you all along. I knew, somewhere deep down, that you might need a home for your own lost self one day. The choice is yours. Whatever you decide, know that I love you and I am proud of you. Always. Your dad. I finished the letter, the pages trembling in my hands, my vision blurred by a torrent of tears. I wasn't crying from sadness, not anymore. I was crying for the father I never truly knew. The secret artist, the quiet philanthropist, the man who had built a secret haven for the forgotten. And I was crying with a profound, aching sense of being seen, of being understood in a way I hadn't felt in years. He had known. He had seen the disaster of my marriage coming and had built me an ark. He had left me not just a building or money, but a purpose, a legacy. He had left me a choice. The tears subsided, replaced by a cold, clear anger. Anger at Mark for his casual cruelty, for dismissing this place and my father's memory as worthless. Anger at the developers, who saw only land to be flattened, not a history to be honored. And anger at myself, for letting myself become so small, for believing I was the person Mark told me I was. I looked around the dusty office at the beautiful, intricate drawings on the corkboard. I looked at the footlocker full of money earned through honest, creative work. This place wasn't a tomb. It was a seed. My father hadn't left me a ruin. He'd left me a blueprint. I wiped my eyes on the sleeve of my coat and stood up. The choice he'd laid out wasn't really a choice at all. How could I sell this? How could I bulldoze my father's heart and soul for a blood money payout? How could I take the easy path when he had so clearly, so lovingly, laid out the harder one for me? Walking away would be a betrayal of him, and a betrayal of the person he believed I could be. It would be proving Mark right, and I could not let that happen. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. I had no idea how to run a foundry, how to manage a co-op, how to fight a development company. I was broke, alone, and completely out of my depth. But for the first time since the divorce, I wasn't numb. I felt a fire ignite in my chest, a hot, fierce determination. This place was mine. This legacy was mine, and I was on a fight for it. The next few weeks were a blur of frantic activity. I used a small portion of the cash from the Foot Locker to rent a tiny, furnished room above the town's diner. The owner, a woman named Marge with a kind face and hair a shade of red not found in nature, looked me over with shrewd eyes and seemed to decide I was worth the risk. I spent my days at the Foundry and my nights at the Oak Haven Public Library, devouring books on small business management, nonprofit law, and basic building repair. I opened the laptop from my father's desk. It was an old model, but it worked. I found a file he mentioned. Apex Development's offer was staggering. $3 million. The number made me physically dizzy. $3 million to just sign a piece of paper and walk away. For a terrifying moment, I hesitated. I could be on a beach somewhere, forgetting Mark, forgetting all of this. But then I pictured the bulldozers, and the image of my father's sketches being crushed into rubble hardened my resolve. I found a notebook with the contact information for the other members of the Oakhaven project. There were about a dozen names. I started making calls. The conversations were cautious at first. They hadn't heard from anyone about the Foundry since my father's death 5 years ago. They had assumed the project was over, a beautiful memory. When I introduced myself as Richard's daughter and told them I wanted to bring it back, there was a universal, stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by a flood of questions, memories, and a cautious, fragile hope. I met them one by one. There was Ben, the woodworker, a quiet man with calloused hands who had lost his own workshop in a fire. There was Maria, the sculptor, a young, fiery artist whose work was bold and brilliant. There was old Mr. Henderson, a retired machinist who could bring any piece of equipment back from the dead. They told me stories about my father I'd never heard. They told me how he'd given them a space when they had none, how he'd celebrated their successes and helped them through their failures. They didn't just respect him, they had loved him. Seeing the Foundry through their eyes, it transformed. It was no longer a scary, derelict monster. It was a place of refuge, of creation, of community. Together, we made a plan. I took a deep breath and called Mr. Abernathy. I told him everything, the letter, the money, the co-op. I told him I was refusing the developer's offer and that I wanted to use the funds to pay the back taxes and formally establish the Oakhaven project as a nonprofit artisan guild. He was silent for a long moment, and I was afraid he would tell me I was crazy. Instead, he just said, "Your father would be so damn proud of you, Clara." He agreed to handle all the legal work pro bono as a final service to his old friend. The first big step was paying the tax lien. I walked into the county courthouse with a certified check for nearly $80,000. The clerk, a bored-looking woman who had probably processed 1,000 foreclosures, looked at the check, then at me, then back at the check. Her eyes widened. "You're paying this?" "In full?" she asked, incredulous. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. The Oakhaven Foundry is no longer abandoned. The feeling of sliding that check under the glass was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. It was a declaration of intent. We were here to stay. Then came a call I was dreading. A slick, confident voice introduced himself as Mr. Davies from Apex Development. He said he'd been notified the lien was cleared and wanted to congratulate me. He was smooth, charming, and condescending. "We're prepared to renew our previous offer, Ms. Jensen. In fact, given your circumstances, we'd be willing to increase it by 10%. A clean break for you. A fresh start." I let him finish his whole oily speech. I pictured him in a high-rise office, looking down on the world, seeing only dollar signs. "Mr. Davies," I said, my voice cold and even, "thank you for your offer, but the Foundry is not for sale. Not now, not ever. We have plans for it." There was a beat of stunned silence. "Plans?" he scoffed. "What plans could you possibly have for that scrap heap?" "That's none of your business," I said. "Please lose my number," and I hung up. I knew it wouldn't be the last I heard from them. Mr. Abernathy warned me that companies like Apex didn't give up easily. They would try to use zoning laws, code violations, anything they could to force us out. The fight was just beginning. But as I stood with Ben and Maria on the Foundry floor, drawing up plans for which roof section to repair first, I didn't feel scared. I felt ready. We started the work. It was backbreaking. We spent weeks just clearing out debris, hauling away rusted scrap, and patching the biggest holes in the roof. Old Mr. Henderson, with an almost magical touch, got the ancient generator to rumble back to life. The first time the lights flickered on in the main workshop, illuminating the space with a warm, steady glow, we all just stood there, covered in grime, and cheered. It felt like we had resurrected the dead. One afternoon, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something told me to answer. "Clara." The voice was instantly recognizable. "Mark." My blood turned to ice. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice flat. I heard you came into some property," he said, trying for a casual tone. "My lawyer was just reviewing the final decree and noticed that old Foundry. Funny thing, Turns out the land it's on has become quite valuable. Some big developer is planning a major project out there. I could hear the greed dripping from every word. It's just a pile of junk, Mark. You said so yourself. A liability. Well, circumstances can change, he said, echoing the developer's words. And since that asset was technically part of the marital estate, even if it was assessed at $1, I'm entitled to half of its current market value. My lawyer is drawing up the papers. The sheer audacity of it left me speechless. He had thrown it away like garbage, and now that he smelled money, he wanted to claim it. The old Clara would have crumpled. She would have been intimidated, scared of another legal battle she couldn't afford. But I wasn't the old Clara anymore. No, Mark, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. You are entitled to nothing. You made your choice. You wanted it all, and you got it. You don't get to come back for the scraps you were too arrogant to see the value in. This place is mine. If you try to come after it, I will fight you with everything I have. And this time, you won't be dealing with a broken woman in a conference room. You'll be dealing with the owner of the Oakhaven Foundry. Goodbye. I hung up before he could respond, my hand shaking not with fear, but with adrenaline. Let him try. I wasn't alone anymore. The change in the Foundry over the next 6 months was slow but miraculous. We patched roofs, replaced windows, and ran new electrical wiring. Ben set up his woodworking equipment in one of the outbuildings, and the scent of freshly cut sawdust mingled with the old smells of metal and oil. Maria claimed a corner of the main floor, and soon the sound of her angle grinder and welding torch echoed through the cavernous space. More people from the town started to show up, drawn by the rumors. A potter who needed a place for a larger kiln. A glassblower whose studio had closed down. A young man who wanted to learn blacksmithing. The Oakhaven project was reborn, bigger and more vibrant than before. We weren't a secret guild of ghosts anymore. We were a community out in the open. We held our first open house in the spring. We cleaned the main floor, strung up lights, and displayed our work. Half the town showed up. They walked through the Foundry with wide, curious eyes, many of them telling stories of their own fathers or grandfathers who had worked there in its heyday. They saw what we were building, not just a collection of workshops, but a revival of the town's creative spirit. Marge from the diner catered the event for free. The mayor gave a speech, praising our contribution to the community. In the middle of it all, Mr. Abernathy pulled me aside. "Good news," he said, a rare smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "I got a call from your ex-husband's lawyer. After I sent them a detailed breakdown of how the Foundry is now the central asset of a registered nonprofit, and that its market value is tied to its community function, not the land underneath it, they have decided to drop their claim. Apparently, there's no profit in suing a charity." I burst out laughing, a real, deep laugh of pure relief and victory. We had won. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I stood alone in the center of the Foundry floor. The space was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was a living silence, filled with the presence of creative energy, of hope, of purpose. The light from a newly installed lamps gleamed on the polished surfaces of Maria's sculptures and the smooth finish of Ben's tables. I thought about the woman I was a year ago, sitting in that empty apartment with a single box and $400 to her name. She had felt so completely worthless, a liability, just like this building had been on paper. She couldn't have imagined this. She couldn't have imagined that her greatest loss would lead her to her greatest discovery. My father had given me more than a building. He had given me a chance to find the person I was meant to be, a person with steel in her spine. He had given me a home, not just a place to live, but a place to belong. He had shown me that inheritance isn't about what you are given. It's about what you choose to build with it. The Foundry had been his lifeline, and he had passed it on to me. And now we were passing it on to others. The roar of the forges would soon be heard in Oakhaven again, not to build weapons of industry, but to forge a new future, piece by beautiful piece. This whole journey has taught me something profound. It taught me that sometimes the things that other people discard are the most valuable things of all. It taught me that starting over isn't about erasing the past, but about building on its foundations, even the broken ones. This Foundry, This community, it was built from the ashes of my old life and the ghost of my father's secret dream. And it's more real and more solid than anything I ever had with Mark. And I want to talk to you for a moment. If you made it this far into my story, thank you. It means a lot to share this. I'm guessing that something in this story resonated with you. Maybe it's the feeling of being underestimated, of being left with nothing, or the struggle to find your purpose after the world has knocked you down. So many of us are handed a life that looks like a derelict building, a liability on a piece of paper. We're told it's worthless, that we should just walk away. But what I've learned is that inside every ruin, there's a foundation you can build on. Inside every person who feels broken, there's a strength they haven't discovered yet. I want to ask you to do two things. First, if this story moved you, please hit that subscribe button and become a part of this community. We're building a space here for people who believe in second chances, for people who know the value of the harder right over the easier wrong. And second, I want you to leave a comment below. I want you to tell me, what is the Foundry in your life? What is that thing, that place, that skill, that dream that someone else wrote off but that you know deep down holds incredible value? I promise I will read as many of your stories as I can, because your stories matter. We build our strength by sharing them. Thank you for listening. And now I have to go. Mr. Henderson is teaching me how to use the forge, and I have a feeling I'm going to...
That's amazing. Suddenly, I don't hate CDs. Oh, I love this little cafe thing that they got going on. Yeah, me too, Usagi. Okay. We'll just pick something up from the vending machine. Can I? Oh, we can take stuff out of here. Not that I'm going to, but it's nice to know that the option's there. Okay. Sorry, I'm mostly lurking during matches. You're good. Also, what matches, Ezzy? Ooh, somebody moved in. Modern Warfare? Oh, hell yeah, Ezzy. Oh, a Farigoraph. Wait, that's so cool. Playing this FPF after a few years of stuff, oh, yeah, I can imagine. I feel like if I went back and played any of the old FPSs I used to, I'd be so rusty. Also, hey, Hard Eyes. Good to see you. Okay, that's just the Quilava habitat. Dino, how are your allergies today? Honestly, so much better. My eyes haven't been burning, which also may be kind of my fault too, because I was rubbing them yesterday, which definitely doesn't help, but